Hello, this is a quick introduction to using the Burda sewing pattern for a trench coat, pattern number 5984. So it's this one over here. So the pattern gives you two options of coats. One is a full length trench coat and one is a shorter length, almost like a pea coat with a double-breasted closure. In the sewing pattern, it gives you some instructions. So those are all on a piece of paper which folds out on the inside, and it takes you through how to make the garment. And also inside the envelope is your actual pattern printed onto tissue paper like this. So usually when you're using a sewing pattern, any new pattern that you use, you should measure yourself, and the measurements required are usually bust, waist, and hip. You would then take your measurements and compare them to measurements given usually on the pattern envelope. That will give you your starting size. So basically that is the size of the pattern you need to use. Please don't go automatically for the size you wear when you buy clothes on the high street. Sewing patterns are quite different. Each pattern brand has their own general sizing. And quite often you may find you need to size up at least 1 or 2 sizes to get your sewing pattern size. So the thing about this Burda pattern is that the actual body measurements are not listed on the envelope. They are, however, listed on the pattern tissue. So if you open out the tissue paper, they will also have a chart in the pattern which shows you how to measure yourself, and it also gives you the different measurements here. So that is usually in centimeters and inches. So what is listed on here, corresponding with all the measurements on the picture that they give at the bottom here, is body measurements. So you would measure yourself, compare your measurements to those listed here, and it will put you into a column. So quite often people are not the same size in their bust, waist, and hip. You may fall over a few different sizes. In that case, I would usually, for a coat, suggest that you go with your bust measurement. It's much easier to make a waist and a hip bigger or smaller if you need to. But if you're taking your bust measurement, then your armhole, your shoulder, and your neckline should fit you quite well. The other thing about using your bust measurement is patterns are usually drafted for a B cup size. If you are outside of a B cup size, you may need to do a full bust adjustment. If you are smaller than a B cup, you may need to do a small bust adjustment. So these are things you should consider doing before you actually cut your fabric. The measurements you will need to compare to this chart over here are point number 2, which is the bust, number 3 is the waist, and number 4 is your hip. You can also do a few others if you would like to. For instance, you might want to measure your shoulder length or your sleeve length, and you can compare that to the actual pattern as well. These measurements will just show you if you need to do any alterations before you cut and make your garment. Another thing that is actually printed on the pattern tissue is key symbols. So what that means is on your sewing pattern, you may have different images, and this is basically a little glossary that will tell you what each of those symbols means. Lastly, what is also shown, this is what I would call a lay plan. It's basically a picture of the best and most economical way to actually lay your pattern pieces onto your fabric. So depending on which style you are making, if it's the short coat or the long trench coat, it will basically give you suggestions of how to lay those pieces onto your fabric when you cut them out. You do need to pay attention to each piece that you're going to cut. Some may need to be cut on a fold. Some may need to be cut only one piece of, and some may need to have 2 pieces cut. I've mentioned that in this pattern, the actual body measurements are given on the pattern tissue. It can also be helpful to check the finished garment measurements. So that will tell you how much ease or how much extra space there is in the finished garment. So when you measure yourself, you're measuring close to your actual skin and your body. But when you make clothes, there is some space, and that allows for comfort and movement. A finished garment measurement will include that extra space. So you can use these to gauge whether the size that the pattern is suggesting is the right size for you. You might feel that when you look at the finished garment measurements, maybe there's not enough room in there for you to feel comfortable. Maybe there's a bit too much room. In that case, you might want to size up one size or maybe size down one size. So the finished garment measurements can really help you to also decide what size is going to be right for you in the sewing pattern. So if you open the pattern tissue, if the finished garment measurements are not listed on the envelope, they might be on the pattern tissue. If I go to the front piece, you might be able to see that there's a little chart here. So this is labeled finished garment measurements, and they've labeled this as the bust, okay? So if you go to the size that the pattern is suggesting that you make, you can check the size of the garment when it will be made up. The same applies for the hip measurement, so you can have a look at those measurements. I will show you shortly how you can use those. So firstly, let me show you how to measure your bust, waist, and hip. You will obviously need a tape measure, and it doesn't matter whether you're measuring in inches or centimeters. However, if you are doing a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment, measuring in inches can be helpful. For the bust measurement, you're going to put the tape measure around your bust at the fullest part. So you want the tape measure to be horizontal. It should not be dipping down at the back. It should be level with the floor. So you'll be holding the tape measure snug, but not tight. And then where the actual tape measure crosses over, and mark down that number. For your waist, on ladies, the waist measurement is usually just above the belly button. It can also just be the smallest part around your tummy, but generally just above the belly button is a good place to measure. For this measurement, I generally hold one finger underneath the tape measure. It's good to be standing upright. Don't suck your belly in, just relax, because the measurement won't be true if you're trying to manipulate it. So one finger underneath the tape measure, and once again, just check the measurement where the beginning of the tape measure crosses over the other end. Okay, so mark that down. That is your waist measurement. I would generally say that your hip measurement is the fullest part around your bum and your hips, as long as it is the fullest measurement. It's usually about 21, 22 centimeters from your waist. So if you prefer, you can measure down the side of your body and hold the tape measure at that point. Once again, you want the tape measure to be horizontal to the floor. Also, not squeezing too tight, one finger underneath the tape measure. Where that tape measure crosses over is your hip measurement. You've then got 3 measurements that you're going to compare with this chart given in the pattern. And if your measurements are all in one column, that's absolutely fine. That would be your starting size. If you're over 3 different measurements, like I said before, it's probably best to go with your bust measurement and then either add to or take off the pattern when you get to the waist and the hip. This sewing pattern comes in different sizes. So all of these sizes are all included in this pattern. If you actually look at the pattern tissue, you can see that every size is actually nested on top of each piece. So when you have measured yourself and found your starting size, you would then go along and actually, hopefully you can see that each line has a different pattern. So you would find the line that you need to follow and cut along that line, and that will be your pattern piece. There are some areas where there's only one line, and that means it's the same for all sizes. You can actually see that the sizes are listed in various places against each different line, and that will tell you that you need to follow that specific line. Okay. If you are combining sizes, so let's say you are larger at the bust, but your waist is a size smaller, what you would do in that instance is when you're cutting out the pattern tissue, or if you are copying it onto another piece of paper, you would find the bust point, which should be marked either on the back or the front piece, or just measure from the shoulder down, and it should correspond with your bust point. You would then go to whichever size or whichever line you're going to be following and start cutting on that line. It's probably best to also draw this in pencil before you cut, and then just taper it down to the smaller size when you get to the waist. If by chance you might need to add back on at the hip, you would then go from the smaller waist size and taper it in a really smooth line to the size of your hip measurement. So it's quite easy to just follow different lines for different areas of your body if you need to. Also, if you are petite or tall, you can also increase or decrease the length of the pattern. Where there are areas where there's a double line, so this is a back piece, and this would be low hip area or thigh area. It's a double line, and at this point you can either cut along that line and spread the pieces open to add a bit of length, or you can fold the piece at this point to take some length out of the pattern. There is also a double line further up near the bust, which you can do the same. So if you have a long torso or long legs, you might need to add length or take away length in different areas of the pattern. Lastly, I just want to show you how to use the finished garment measurements. Remember, those are actually listed on the pattern tissue. So if I'm considering my mannequin over here, her bust measurement is 87 centimeters. So that would put her into a size 38 on this sewing pattern. So if I consider that 38 is her pattern size, I can then go to the finished garment measurements on the pattern tissue. For size 38, it says that the finished garment measurements are 101 centimeters. If her bust is 87, 101 is obviously bigger, so that means that there's an extra measurement called ease. Do consider, however, the fact that you might be wearing your trench coat over a jacket or over a jumper and possibly a base layer as well. So you do want a little bit more room in a coat. How I would use that measurement is once again going to your body and putting the tape measure around your body. You're not going to be measuring your skin this time. You're actually going to be holding the tape measure at that finished garment measurement. So at the bust, I'm now going to bring my tape measure across to 101 centimeters. I can then consider how much ease there is around the bust. Okay, so there is quite a bit, but like I said, a coat does need to be a bit more roomy. At this point, if you think it's a little bit too much, you might want to size down. Check the finished garment measurement of the next size down and just once again put it around you and see how that feels. I think for my mannequin, I think that that would be a good size. So considering that, I would go with the size 38. So hopefully that has given you a little bit of an introduction into using the sewing pattern. If possible, it is always good to do a sample before you cut your actual fabric. At that stage, you can actually just make up the basic pieces, try them on, and once again, consider the fit, do alterations if you need to, and then go on to cut your actual garment. If you have any questions or concerned, just get in touch. Thank you. Goodbye.